Hi guys, welcome back to my channel. My name is Alexis and today I'm going to be sharing all of the dreams and disappointments that I read for December 22. So with that being said, let's just hop into it. The first book I completed was The Horse and His Boy by C.S. Lewis. This is book 3 in the Chronicles of Narnia series. I'm determined to finish the series this year. There are a total of 7 books and they're audiobooks, about 3 hours or so each, but I do go by 2 times speed, if not more. So I know for a fact that I'm going to get it done this year. Essentially, this follows a boy and his horse. He was taken in, separated from birth from his birth family, and he was adopted by this farmer who didn't really treat him any more than a slave. And he decides to run away with a talking horse who turns out to be a Narnian, and this follows their journey. Because this is more so a children's or juvenile fiction, fantasy, and because it's a classic, I'm not going to share too much about it other than the fact that for me, as I was listening to it on audiobook, because they were new characters to me, I was getting a little bit confused with the names and talking about the terrain within Narnia or the surrounding countries of Narnia. All in all, I did give this 3 out of 5 stars. There is a thread of morality understanding throughout the series, as to be expected because C.S. Lewis was a religious believer and he did want to use that as inspiration throughout the Chronicles of Narnia. So I can appreciate that as well. But yes, I will be continuing the series. Now, the first Christmas romance that I completed was a historical romance, and that would be A Wallflower Christmas by Lisa Kleypas. This is somewhat a class difference and cultural difference romance as well. So essentially this book follows Rafe and his love interest. Rafe is the brother of 2 of the main heroines from the Wallflower series. I did enjoy their books. My favorite is It Happened One Autumn. But essentially, Rafe comes from America to England in order to find a wife, but he doesn't have any serious intentions of doing so until he starts talking with the chaperone of the person who he was supposed to court, and it ends up being between the chaperone and himself. I didn't appreciate how Rafe was treating Hannah at first. Hannah is the chaperone. He would be stealing kisses or just make comments privately when she wasn't showing any interest yet. He also suggested that she become a mistress for him. I don't like when that happens. But over the course of the book, I did come to appreciate him and their relationship dynamic. For A Wallflower Christmas, I did have a mix of tabs here as well. Because of my enjoyment and love for the original 4 girls, I do appreciate Rafe and his relationship as well. I did give this one 4 out of 5 stars. So I continued the Chronicles of Narnia with Prince Caspian by C.S. Lewis. This is, of course, written in third person. I listened to the audiobook. There is a movie about this, so I did have a better understanding of the characters. But essentially this one is book 4, and I am going to also mention that the movie did follow the same aspects. However, of course, like any book series to movie series or TV series, they tend to make changes that work better cinematically. So I was surprised that the subplot romance that was in the movie with Ben Barnes, that it really wasn't in the book at all. That was clearly created for theatrical purposes. It did certainly work better for the movie, I think, because of that. I noticed that within movies, there's always a subplot of romance, even if it's just a little bit or suggested. This did offer more background in terms of Caspian's family, so I did get a better understanding of who he is and his upbringing, his family dynamics. I did appreciate that. I did give this one 4 out of 5 stars. After that, I read on Kindle Unlimited Anastasia by Sophie Lark, and I gotta say, if I had not already read her previous books, such as the Brutal Birthright series and the Kingmaker series, or most of the Kingmaker series. I still have one more book to read for that one. But if I had not already touched base with some of her backlist, I probably would have DNF'd this book, because the first half of the book, Anastasia, is mainly following Anastasia's childhood and family dynamics, political aspects about it. Her love interest is Damien. They did meet as children. It's definitely an enemies to lovers situation. He is the son of someone who did go to war with her father, but they did eventually surrender, and he was taken in as a ward by her uncle. It hurts to say, but yeah, I probably would have DNF'd this 50%, but I pushed through and I did end up giving it 4 out of 5 stars. But if I were to just base it off the first half, I probably would have given it 3 or less stars, because it didn't really build enough relationship dynamic for me in the first half. However, the second half was filled with betrayal and the angst, the violence, the steamy times. It was so well executed, the second half, that I did have to, give it 4 stars instead of 3. This is essentially written in dual perspective between Anastasia and Damien. However, the prologue is written in third person, so we get a hint of that. Rasputin is the obvious enemy. We would already know that going in because of history. That was the inspiration for this, but it's, I would say, loosely inspired by history, because again, it was the Romanovs but set in a fantasy world, and it doesn't have the same ending as reality does, if that's not a hint, obviously, because Anastasia didn't survive in real life. But yeah, I did appreciate the nods to the movie, such as the Memory Keeper. I really loved that. My favorite character was Anna, who was a ballerina and did help encourage Anastasia to not just survive, but to overcome whatever they are going through in that time. I would primarily call this a fantasy book with romance as opposed to a fantasy romance, and had I known that going in, I probably wouldn't have been as annoyed as I was in the first half, but the second half was perfect. There is an element of time involved here because it is fantasy. Anastasia does have the ability to transcend time, but it's not always within her control. That does play a part in a plot twist in this book, but that's all I'm going to say about that, because again, it was well executed, but I might even want to change that aspect about it as well, because some things are erased from history, whereas other things are worked out. But yeah, 4 out of 5 stars seems just about right for this one, for me. It does nod to the movie Anastasia that came out in 1997. That is my favorite non-Disney movie, so that probably also affected how I went in with bias toward Anastasia book. I had my own expectations. In hindsight, if you're going to write something that is already inspired by something that exists, I think you're already going in with a certain level of expectations and should be prepared for that constructive criticism. Then I read 'Tis the Season for Revenge by Morgan Elizabeth. This did blow up more so recently because around Christmas time, and it is a little spicy. It is written in first person, dual perspective. It's a contemporary romance, holiday romance, obviously. There is interracial romance in here between the white female character and a Latino male character. There is an age gap of 14 years. It is something that starts out as casual dating for revenge, but that's not communicated, I will say. This does nod to the Reese Witherspoon movie, Legally Blonde, which I did appreciate, and that probably also factored into my enjoyment of this book as well. This is about Abigail, and essentially she was dumped by her boyfriend of 4 years. In the company of her friends, she decides to start dating his boss in order to get revenge and show up to the holiday party and be like, hey, you missed out on me. Like, you could have had this, but I didn't appreciate, so now I'm with him. Her love interest is Damien as well, and he was just so appreciative of her. They had mutual understanding about the importance of their career paths. So in his case, he is a lawyer who helps with cases that clearly come from history of domestic abuse, or just helping the victims more so than the one who's being prosecuted. She was more someone who did makeup for people while working in a department store, and he didn't demean her in any way for her job. He thought it was just as important as the job he had because it still helped build the client's confidence, and I thought that was a beautiful way to discuss it considering how her ex treated her. But those are just some of my favorite moments from this book. Again, it is very well written. I gave it 4 out of 5 stars. I will critique, though, in the end, when it is revealed what she had done and there's the conflict going on, I felt like it was resolved too quickly and it was only really dialogue when they were talking it out. I didn't feel like he was, mad long enough, to be honest, considering how long they had been together for a couple months, for as long as they were seeing each other. He didn't know what was really going on. But their relationship itself was not fake. They went in with intentions of just being casual, and then it just grew more. So, yeah, that's just for me, though, how the disagreement was sorted. But it was still good. 4 out of 5 stars. After that, I started the Hathaway series by Lisa Kleypas with Mine Till Midnight. This is written in third person. It is, of course, a historical romance, interracial romance. As you can see in my Mine Till Midnight book, I did tab it a lot. So I have mixed feelings. They're just as mixed as my tabs here. There's class difference in here, a forbidden romance, mention of illness and loss, some minor paranormal activity considering said loss, but it doesn't play a main factor into this book. There is also mention of suicidal thoughts, not with the main couple, but someone else who will eventually be in a main couple. There is also some anti-Ramani sentiment in here. So the Rama people are from northern India, and there is obvious prejudice expressed in this book and the next book. But that is essentially what's going on. And this is between Amelia Hathaway and her love interest, who is Cam Rohan. Amelia's older brother inherited a title in the upper class following the death of their parents and a dear friend, Laura, who was a friend of the family. Amelia was also getting over the fact that she was passed over by a former lover for someone else in order to gain status. And while out looking for her brother, she did end up meeting Cam in search of him. They do share a moment, but then they meet again once she and her family are moved into their new estate, and they're next door to the Westcliffs. The Westcliffs are my favorite couple from the Wallflower series. It happened one autumn, so definitely feel free to check that one out. So far, I do think that series is superior to this one for sure, considering I read 2 books already of the Hathaways, and they're just not hitting right for me. And I'll get into that in a moment. They do definitely have crossing paths with the couples from the Wallflower series. I did appreciate that because, again, I did enjoy that series, and the cameos in here are just great. Their friendship is great. I was more interested in the sisters Amelia has. Amelia and Cam's meeting was short, and their courtship was swift, with very little development. They had a lustful relationship, and they still have yet to really know each other by the conclusion of the book, in my opinion. The prejudice comments about Cam made me uncomfortable, especially from Leo, who is Amelia's older brother. His book is later on, and I do have yet to get to his to see how that works out. He showed dislike toward Maripen. Maripen is also a Roma person who lived with the Hathaways for a long period of time since childhood, and he had clear resentment against Maripen as well for reasons to be explained in further books. Some of my favorite moments honestly revolve around the meeting of the Hathaways and the Westcliffs. So, for example, when Cam is shielding Amelia from experimental explosives, that's so random, but yes, that did happen. There's also the time when Marcus invited the Hathaways to dine with the Westcliffs. Lillian is, of course, very welcoming. She and Marcus are already married about 4 years. Again, they're from my favorite book of the Wallflower series. I appreciated the moments between Winifred and Maripen. Win and Maripen's book is next after this. I did read that already, but I'll get into my thoughts on that in a moment. I also appreciated their night together at midnight between Cam and Amelia. And aside from seeing my favorite couple from the Wallflower series, Marcus and Lillian, I was more interested in Maripen and Winifred's story, which is the second book, and I did read it later into December, but I'll share my thoughts on that in a moment. I did give this one 3 out of 5 stars. After that, I listened to another Christmas holiday romance, and that was Mangoes and Mistletoe by Adrianna Herrera. This is written in first person, dual perspective, a contemporary romance, sapphic romance, and it is a foodie romance as well. It's the love story between two chefs, a grumpy sunshine romance, and it is also acknowledging immigrant story, which I appreciate. So this story is between Quisqueya and Soli. Soli is the self-taught chef, whereas Quisqueya is more professionally taught, and they are paired together for a Christmas competition cooking show. And when they are paired together, essentially Soli is more outgoing and inclined to make the first moves. But Quisqueya seemed pretty put off at first, even though internally she was like, oh my gosh, I'm so attracted to her. So they do have different reasons for being in the competition, but it's clear that their attraction is immediate. However, it is not an insta romance, in my opinion. It's just clear that their attraction was there. They hung out for a period of time, obviously, because they're within close proximity and they're making all these dishes together. They have to compile these different recipes. Some of my favorite moments include the first time they met, and I also appreciated Sully for her cheeky comments or internal comments to herself. I do have some other favorite moments, but again, because it's a novella, I don't feel inclined to overshare. If you want to check it out, definitely feel free. I did give this one 5 out of 5 stars. It's a cute, short Christmas romance, so couldn't go wrong here. Next, I read Seduce Me at Sunrise by Lisa Kleypas. This is the second book in the Hathaway series. As you can see, I did have mixed tabs in this as well. This is between Winifred and Maripen. This one is written in third person. It's, of course, a historical romance, also interracial romance, forbidden romance. There is mutual pining, illness, recovery, identity, and prejudice involved. Maripen was a Roma boy who was rescued by the Hathaways and nursed to health when he was a child. He chose to stay because of his connection with Winifred, and he nursed her when she had an illness that did hinder her for a long period of time. So when she decided to leave for a clinic, she was treated, but they didn't see each other again for 2 years. I enjoyed the longing farewell, the unexpected reunion, although that was kind of questionable on Maripen's part, what he was doing. You'd have to read it to understand what I'm talking about. There's also the learning of connections and family relations. I did enjoy the suspenseful aspect in regards to poisoning involved. And there's also the night in the cottage. But those are just some of my favorite moments. So, because of their scenes from the previous book, I really wanted to love their story. But again, it didn't meet my standards entirely. This is an okay read. At first, I enjoyed the pining and the longing between them, but Wynn was clearly holding out for Maripen, and he was constantly going back and forth with her, and that got old really quick. He didn't respect her choices in terms of her dreams and desires on how she wanted to live her life. He was overprotective and overbearing. The element of her second love interest did give me the same vibes as Christopher Frost did from the first book. It didn't feel like anything new in terms of possible love interests, other than the fact that it does incorporate some suspenseful aspects in the end. I did give this one a 3 out of 5 stars. Because aside from Maripen's treatment of Winifred and her choices, he also continued to display a lack of interest in his background, and he did display some self-hate for his culture. But again, considering his background and the violence he had to endure, I guess that's also understandable. I just wish he had come to appreciate his strengths more. After that, I read my last Christmas romance, and that would be Snow King Catches His Snowflake by A.E. Valdez. I did read this using Kindle Unlimited. It is written in first person, dual perspective. It's a contemporary romance. It does mention loss of loved ones in here. There is a mention of ex cheating as well. It is a one-room trope and close proximity for sure. So this follows Noelle and Snow, obvious Christmas names. Noelle broke up with her cheating ex-boyfriend and was convinced that she had to go on a solo vacation. Snow, on his end, was still grieving the loss of his father and his fiance when his assistant booked him in the mountains for the same vacation. Snow and Noelle essentially were booked in the same room. Although Snow did book first, he did suggest that Noelle just stay around and see how they spend the holidays together. Some of my favorite moments include the club and kissing a stranger who is not Snow. I thought that was an interesting plot point throughout the book. There again is the one room and pepper spray involved, snow blowing, birthday suit situation, the realization of who the kissed stranger was in the club. There is also a nod to Snow's other brothers, and that would be Winter and North. I do expect for them to have their own books eventually, but essentially Winter is the eldest of the three brothers, followed by Snow and then North. After the passing of their father, Snow did primarily take over their family's toy company, and Winter spiraled. He was previously engaged to someone else who is also mentioned in this book and happened to have close ties as well. So I do expect Winter and his love interest to get their next book. I'm not going to mention who that is because the reveal was fun in this. I want to also mention that this was a delightful book. However, I do feel like there was a good amount of potential in it. At times, I felt the dialogue was too corny or unlikely, whereas other times it made me laugh out loud because of how accurate and how much it aligned with my sense of humor. So all in all, I gave this one 3 out of 5 stars. I do intend to continue on with the series if there are any, because again, I suspect that North and Winter will get their own books. After that, I read one of my favorites of the year, and that is Mile High by Liz Tomforde. This is written in first person, dual perspective. This one features a contemporary romance, a sports romance, specifically hockey, and it is a forbidden romance because it's between a hockey player and his flight attendant. There is also a multiracial romance in here. The male main character is described to be brown, and then the female main character. It does also nod to a history of parental neglect, generational trauma, and mental health awareness. So this book follows Xander's and Stevie. Xander's is one of the hockey players, and he typically is more so of a player and personality in terms of the media and how he presents himself in order to be successful in his profession, whereas Stevie is a flight attendant for him, and they are stuck together for the entire season because of a contract for the team. After their first meeting on the first flight, they clearly didn't have a great start, but there was a hint of banter in here. Xander's does decide to get under Stevie's skin for the remainder of the season, but little does he know that, in fact, she is the one getting under his skin and in the best way possible. After they share one night only together, they can't get each other out of their heads. Honestly, the story did sneak up on me. I was hearing some buzz around it after first initially hearing it from Caitlin. I loved the fact that Z's character was very self-aware and did promote mental health awareness. He was even involved in a foundation with another hero created by Liz Tomforde, which is in another couple of books, but I have yet to read those. This is my first read by this author. I appreciated his friendship with Madison. Madison is the other hero from another book that I have yet to read. And there's also Madison's wife, Logan. They have a very close relationship with Xander's, and Xander is also the uncle figure for their daughter. I appreciated that as well. Stevie's character was just so relatable to me in terms of the fact that sometimes she would be really confident and other times she'd be really self-conscious. She is a curvy heroine. I appreciate that as well. Stevie also has a twin brother, Ryan. He is going to get his book in The Right Move. I look forward to reading that one because it's going to come out on February 7th, and I knew I was going to read The Mile High before it came out, but I didn't realize how attached I was going to get, and now I have to decide if I want the discreet cover or the model cover. I kind of want both, but I'm waiting it out. Yeah. So this book was really good. I loved it so much because of the representation in here, and there was no true miscommunication. And I mean to say that because by the time they did have their issues together, it was really because of worries about career paths and how to move forward. But all in all, the groveling was great in here. There are also dogs involved. Stevie does volunteer at an animal shelter. And for Xander's, he was part of a foundation with Madison that promoted mental health awareness for the youth. So I really appreciated nods to those. But all in all, I did give this 5 out of 5 stars. Like I said, I'm looking forward to The Right Move, scheduled to come out February 7th. And I'm already following her on Instagram and in the Facebook group. So definitely check those out. Before I forget, the Mile High playlist is available on Spotify. And I have to say, this is the best book playlist I've ever heard. And in hindsight, I don't typically listen to a playlist unless it's a book that I really favored. And this was one of them, so obviously worked out. Most of the songs I even already listened to at some point. They're mostly artists I'm familiar with already, so that already worked in the favor. But as I was listening to the playlist after reading the book, every single song, it was so clear to me why it was part of this playlist. And I wonder if the author made the playlist first and went back and wrote, or if the story came first and then picked the songs, or was it a combination of the two? I do have yet to get that question answered, so stay tuned for that. And the last book I read in 2022 was The Ippos King by Grace Draven. This is the third book in the Wraith Kings series, It is following Radiance and Eidolon. I did review those before, back in October, I believe, so feel free to check that out. But essentially, this is between Saravek and Anastasia. Saravek felt inclined to escort the body of someone who helped the Wraith Kings win the war against the Gala. The Gala is supposed to be like these demon entities from another realm, and someone who helped them strongly, who was a monk, soul was taken, but his body remained. So until they're able to get his soul back, if ever, the body would not age. And Saravek wanted to escort the body of the monk back to his home. Anastasia, on behalf of her cousin Brishan and Ildiko from the previous books, she wanted to escort as well. This follows their romance on their journey. This is a third-person romance. I listened to the audiobook. It is a fantasy romance. There's close proximity in here, different species, mention of magic, betrayal, violence, death, and all that jazz. I will say that after reading it, it was mostly just to see what happens in the aftermath of the Radiance and Eidolon books, but I didn't think it was necessary. Perhaps Eidolon would have been a nice conclusion, but this book, I was expecting answers, which I did not get, and I'm bothered about it. I also feel like, again, the name of new characters did confuse me a little bit in terms of the plot. I noticed this tends to happen for fantasy romances for me, so perhaps it's the format that I'm reading them on, and instead I should be reading them physically so I don't have that confusion. I found it interesting that Saravek's character did in fact have a history of first marriage and child, but they were lost to him, and he didn't feel inclined to get married, but not necessarily because he was still in love with his first wife. They had a close relationship, but it's not like something that held him back. He just felt like his position wasn't fair to a possible relationship with anyone else. Whereas Anastasia, she was very standoffish. I would say she was more so the grump, and Saravek was more of the sunshine, if we are to give them titles. But again, this is a time of war, and they're both warriors. They are both well trained in defense and things like that. So if I am to label it, grumpy sunshine within their relationship, but overall, I don't know if I could argue that. Like I said, I was bothered about some of the questions that I had from Eidolon that were not answered in this book, and it was over 15 hours of content. So I also didn't like the conclusion on how they decided to stay together because of how things went down for Saravek. And that is further explained in my Goodreads review, but I don't want to overshare here. I did give this one 3 out of 5 stars. And those are all the books that I read for December 2022. Let me know in the comments if you read any of these or if you plan to. I'd love to hear about it. Feel free to check out my Goodreads for full reviews and comments. Maybe if you want to talk more about my favorite moments that are also in the reviews, let me know. But until next time, my name's Alexis. Take care and happy reading.